The ballroom shimmered with the glow of 1,000 chandeliers, a kaleidoscope of laughter, clinking glasses, and carefully curated conversations. It was a world of silk and smoke, built on power, wealth, and polite deception. I had spent years mastering the art of control, shaping my life into something that looked perfect from the outside. Tonight was no different. My wife, Serena, stood beside me, her fingers lightly brushing against my sleeve in a way that once would have sent shivers through me. Now, it felt calculated, performed. She looked breathtaking, a vision in emerald silk, her auburn hair catching the light, her delicate perfume weaving its way through the air. I used to think I was the luckiest man alive. Now I wasn't sure if I had ever truly known her at all. "You're quiet tonight," she murmured, tilting her face toward mine. I turned to her, my expression unreadable, perfected after years of high-stakes business negotiations. "Just thinking." A flicker of something crossed her face. Worry? Guilt? Or was I just seeing what I wanted to see? Her eyes scanned the room again. She had been doing that all night, as if looking for someone. I already knew who. Victor Harrington. My business partner. My closest friend. My mistake. He stood across the room, laughing easily, his whiskey swirling in one hand, his other casually tucked in his pocket. He was magnetic in the way that made people lean in when he spoke. I used to trust him with my life. Now, I couldn't even trust him to keep his hands off my wife. Something inside me coiled tight, but I kept my face neutral. Emotion had no place here. Not yet. "Excuse me for a moment," Serena whispered, pressing a soft kiss to my cheek. It was routine now, this little act of affection. She didn't know that I had started counting. The third time tonight. I watched her slip away through the crowd, graceful, practiced. I let her go. I always let her go. Not tonight. I set my glass down and followed. The hallway was dimly lit, lined with doors leading to private lounges for high-profile guests. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and secrecy. And then, I heard it. Serena's voice. "I told you not here." I exhaled slowly, steadying myself, then stepped closer. The door was slightly ajar, just enough for me to see inside. She was there. With him. Victor leaned in, too close, his fingers grazing her waist in a way that wasn't casual. That wasn't friendly. That was possession. A part of me wanted to shove the door open, let my rage take control, destroy everything in its path. But something colder, sharper took over instead. I listened. "You need to be careful," Serena whispered. Her voice was tense. "Nathaniel is getting suspicious." Victor smirked, that same damn smirk I had seen 1,000 times. "You're the one who keeps looking at me across the room, sweetheart. If you want this to keep going, you need to act normal." My chest felt like it was caving in, but I stayed still. Serena swallowed hard. "This has to end soon. I can't keep lying to him. Not I regret this. Not I made a mistake. Just that lying had become inconvenient. I had been right. I just hadn't wanted to be." I stepped back, forcing my breath steady. My hands curled into fists at my sides, nails biting into my palms. If I let myself react now, I would lose. I didn't plan to lose. Turning on my heel, I walked back down the hallway, back into the warmth and light of the ballroom. The mask was back in place before I even stepped inside. I reached the bar and signaled for a drink. "Scotch." "Neat." The bartender slid the glass toward me, and I took a slow sip, letting the burn settle in my chest. Not for the first time. I wondered how long I had been lying to myself. Minutes later, Serena returned, her face calm, unreadable. But her fingers trembled slightly as she slipped her hand around my arm. Victor wasn't far behind. "Nathaniel," he greeted, raising his glass. "Hell of a party, isn't it?" I met his gaze, forcing my lips into a slow, deliberate smile. "Indeed. You've outdone yourself this year." He grinned, oblivious. He thought he had one. They both did. They had no idea what was coming next. The ride home was suffocating. Serena sat beside me in the back seat of the town car, scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the cold glow of the screen. She hadn't said much since we left the gala, but then again, neither had I. The silence between us was thick, The kind of silence that wasn't comfortable or natural. It was the silence of two people who had once shared everything and now shared nothing at all. I watched her out of the corner of my eye. She was calm. Too calm. How long had she been perfecting this act? I turned my gaze to the passing city lights. A few months ago, I might have asked her what was wrong, reached for her hand, tried to bridge the growing distance between us. But that man was gone. Now, I was just waiting for her to make a mistake. The driver pulled up to our building, and we stepped out. The doorman greeted us with a polite nod, but I barely registered it. My mind was still back in that dimly lit hallway, hearing Serena whisper to Victor, watching the way his fingers lingered on her waist. I had never considered myself a jealous man, but this wasn't jealousy. This was war. We rode the elevator in silence, the tension thick enough to choke. I felt her shift beside me, felt the weight of her glance. "You're quiet tonight," she finally said. I let a slow breath out through my nose, my face impassive. "Just tired." A lie. She studied me for a beat longer before nodding, as if accepting the excuse. The elevator doors slid open, and we stepped into the penthouse. It was exactly as we had left it, pristine, elegant, cold. She slipped off her heels with a soft sigh, tossing her clutch onto the marble countertop. "I need a shower," she muttered, disappearing down the hall. I stood there for a moment, unmoving. The familiar ache in my chest had dulled now, replaced by something sharper, something unforgiving. I walked to my study and shut the door behind me. Then, I picked up my phone. "I want you to run the tests." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You're sure?" Damian Cross, my attorney, sounded cautious, but not surprised. I stared down at my desk, at the neatly organized documents and untouched glass of whiskey. My voice was steady when I answered. "Yes, both of them." I heard the scrape of a chair, the rustling of papers. "Nathaniel, I have to ask, do you really think there's a chance?" "Just do it." A heavy silence settled between us. Finally, Damian sighed. "All right, I'll arrange it. But if the results come back confirming you're their father, then I'll be relieved," I said. And it was the truth. It would be easier if this betrayal belonged only to me. If I found out that my children, weren't really mine, I wasn't sure what I would do. But I needed to know. I ended the call and leaned back in my chair, my fingers pressed against my temples. Outside, the city hummed with life, oblivious to the war unfolding behind my eyes. The door creaked open. I looked up just in time to see Serena leaning against the frame, wrapped in a silk robe, damp strands of hair clinging to her collarbone. "Still working?" she asked. "Just finishing up?" She hesitated, then padded barefoot into the room, lowering herself onto the edge of my desk. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and steam. She reached for my wrist, fingers light against my skin. "Come to bed?" For a moment, I almost laughed. She had spent the night touching another man, whispering to him in the dark, and now she was here, pretending we were still us. I turned my hand over, letting my fingers trace the inside of her wrist. Her pulse fluttered under my touch. "What are you thinking about?" she murmured. I met her gaze. She was testing me, watching for cracks in my composure. So I gave her nothing. "Just tired," I said again. She searched my face for a moment before nodding, then leaned in, pressing a lingering kiss to my cheek. "Don't work too late," she whispered before slipping out of the room. The door clicked shut behind her. I sat there, unmoving, the ghost of her touch still burning on my skin. "I know everything, Serena." And soon, so would she. The next morning, I left early, heading straight to Damian's office. He greeted me with a grim nod. "It's done. The samples are with the lab. We'll have results in a few days." I nodded once, swallowing the lump in my throat. "And the divorce?" I asked. Damian exhaled. "That depends. If you want a clean break, we can start drafting the paperwork. If you want to fight for full custody, we'll need to prepare for war." I stared out the window, watching the sun rise over the skyline. "I want everything," I said. "The kids, the assets, the company. I want her to have nothing left." Damian studied me for a long moment. "You've already started moving your investments, haven't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Damian nodded, reaching for a file. Then let's do this right. That evening, I returned home to find Serena in the kitchen, sipping a glass of wine. She smiled when she saw me, and I had to fight the urge to flinch. "Long day?" she asked, tilting her head. "You have no idea." She laughed softly, then stepped closer, running her fingers down my sleeve. "We should get away for a while," she murmured. "Take the kids somewhere. Just us." For a split second, I almost believed her, almost believed that she meant it, that she still saw a future where we could be a family. But I wasn't that man anymore. I reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, letting my thumb brush against her cheek. She leaned into my touch, closing her eyes. And in that moment, I realized she really had no idea. She had no idea that I already had one foot out the door. That soon, everything she had built, everything she had taken for granted, would come crashing down. And when it did, I would be the one watching from the other side, untouched by the wreckage. She kissed me, slow and sweet, as if nothing had changed. I kissed her back, and in my mind, I whispered, "Goodbye, Serena." The morning sun filtered through the penthouse windows, casting long, golden streaks across the marble floor. Serena stood by the counter, sipping coffee, looking out at the city as if it belonged to her. As if this life, this home, this family, were still hers to claim. She had no idea how wrong she was. "Sleep well?" she asked, turning to face me, her voice casual, too casual. I nodded, keeping my expression unreadable. Yeah. It wasn't a lie. For the first time in months, I had slept soundly, because I knew what was coming. I knew that by the end of this, she wouldn't be standing in my kitchen anymore. I sat down at the table, flipping through emails, barely listening as she started talking about the trip she wanted to take. Some luxurious resort, just the two of us. A last-ditch effort to pull me back in, but I wasn't listening. My phone vibrated against the table. A message from Damien. "It's time." I exhaled slowly and stood, stretching as if it were just another day. "I've got a meeting. Don't wait up." Serena smiled, oblivious. "I won't." She had no idea she would never get the chance. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Serena sat across from me, her hair styled to perfection, wearing the softest shade of blue, subtle, deliberate. A color chosen to make her look like the wounded party, the loving mother, the wronged wife. She wasn't any of those things. Her lawyer sat beside her, whispering, his voice urgent. She was tense, her fingers gripping the table just a little too tightly. I wondered if she finally felt it, the shift, the loss of control. Damien leaned in. "You ready for this?" I didn't look at him. My eyes were locked on Serena, more than ever. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Her lawyer spoke first, spinning a carefully crafted narrative. He painted me as the emotionally distant husband, too absorbed in work to see the cracks in my own marriage. A good provider, yes, but not the man she had needed. I almost admired the performance. Almost. When Damien stood, he wasted no time. He presented the affair, the deception, the betrayal. But he didn't stop there. He laid out the evidence of Serena's reckless spending, her long absences from our children's lives, the countless nights where she had chosen Victor over them. And then, the final blow. The photos. Her and Victor. The hotel rooms. The time-stamped receipts. The text messages. Serena's face paled. Her fingers tightened into fists, her lawyer whispering furiously in her ear. But it was too late. She knew it. I knew it. The judge's ruling came faster than I expected. Primary custody, mine. Visitation, limited. She turned to me as the verdict sank in, her lips parted in shock, her eyes wide with something I couldn't quite place. Desperation, maybe even regret. She reached for my arm as I stood. "Nathaniel." I pulled away, my voice low. "You did this to yourself." She sat there, frozen, as I walked out of the courtroom. It was over. Or so I thought. The night was quiet. Too quiet. I sat in the living room, a glass of scotch in my hand, staring out at the city below. The weight of the day settled over me, heavier than I expected. I had one. But at what cost? I had seen the look on Noah's face when I told him. The confusion, the sadness. Madeline had cried, her small hands gripping my shirt, asking why Mommy wouldn't be living with us anymore. I had no answers that would make sense to them. I had done this for them, to protect them, and yet, the victory felt hollow. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Serena. Please, Nathaniel, don't do this. Let's talk. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, without hesitation, I deleted the message. Serena had already said enough. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The divorce was nearly final, the financial battle still ahead, but the hardest part was done. The truth was out. A sharp knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I stood, making my way to the entrance, expecting Damien or maybe Gregory from the board. But when I opened it, I froze. Serena. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale, but she wasn't crying. She stepped inside before I could stop her, her heels clicking against the marble floor. I just need to talk, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I shut the door behind her, watching her carefully. You have nothing to say that I want to hear. She flinched, but recovered quickly. Please, just listen. 5 minutes. I folded my arms, waiting. She let out a shaky breath. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. And I know that now. I said nothing. I was stupid. I got caught up in something I thought was love, but it wasn't. It was just an escape. From the loneliness. From the way things had become between us. I clenched my jaw. So it was my fault? She shook her head quickly. No. God. No. I'm not blaming you, Nathaniel. I'm blaming myself. I should have fought for us. I should have told you how I felt instead of running to Victor. I exhaled sharply. Well, it's too late now. She swallowed hard. I know. Silence stretched between us, heavy, suffocating. Then, she stepped closer. I don't want to lose everything, she whispered. I don't want to lose my kids. My heart twisted. For all her flaws, for all the ways she had destroyed us, I knew she loved them. But love wasn't enough. You already did. She let out a soft, broken laugh, shaking her head. I suppose I did. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. You should go. She looked at me for a long time, searching for something, maybe hope, but there was none left. Finally, she nodded, stepping back. I'm sorry, Nathaniel. I didn't respond. She turned and walked toward the door, pausing for just a second before leaving. And then, she was gone. I stood there, staring at the empty space where she had been, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. This was what I wanted. This was what had to happen. But damn if it didn't still hurt. The morning of the custody hearing, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie. I had done this 1,000 times before, preparing for high-stakes meetings, board presentations, deals worth millions. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was my children's future. I turned away from my reflection, exhaling slowly. The air in the penthouse felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. For months, I had been fighting for this moment, gathering evidence, strategizing every move. Now it was here, and I wasn't sure if I was ready. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Serena was already seated when I arrived, dressed in a soft blue suit, her hair perfectly styled, her face calm. But I could see it, the tightness in her jaw, the way her fingers clutched the pen in front of her. She was nervous. She should be. Her lawyer spoke first, his voice smooth, polished. He painted her as the devoted mother, the woman who had made a mistake but still deserved her children. He didn't mention Victor. Didn't mention the nights she had chosen someone else over them. But I knew. The judge listened carefully, nodding occasionally, his expression unreadable. Then it was my turn. Damien stood, his voice steady, controlled. He presented the evidence methodically, text messages, hotel receipts, financial records. But what mattered most weren't the documents. It was the absence, the nights she hadn't been there, the mornings she had missed, the birthdays, the school plays, the simple moments that had mattered to Noah and Madeline but hadn't mattered to her. Serena sat stiffly beside her lawyer, her fingers tightening in her lap. For the first time, she looked scared. Good. She needed to understand what she had done. When the judge finally spoke, His voice was firm. Primary custody, mine. Visitation, limited. Serena inhaled sharply. I could see her eyes widen, her chest rise as if she had been physically struck. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering something, but she wasn't listening. She was staring at me. The hearing ended, papers signed, final decisions made. I stood. She stood. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, she spoke. Nathaniel, please. Her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. I should have felt satisfaction. Victory. But all I felt was tired. I shook my head. This isn't about us anymore, Serena. Her eyes glistened. I know. But I exhaled, rubbing my temple. Don't do this. Her throat worked as she swallowed, nodding slowly. And then, she turned and walked away. I watched her go, feeling something inside me shift. I had one. So why did it feel like we had both lost? The ride home was silent. Noah and Madeline sat beside me, their faces pressed against the car windows, watching the city blur past. When we pulled into the driveway, Noah was the first to speak. Is Mom coming home? I hesitated, gripping the steering wheel tighter. No, buddy. His shoulders slumped. Is it because of the fight? I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, my heart twisting. It's complicated. Madeline's voice was small. Will we still see her? I turned in my seat, reaching for her hand. Of course. She loves you both very much. She chewed on her lip, nodding slowly. I forced a smile. Hey, how about pizza tonight? Movie night? Noah shrugged. Yeah, sure. I sighed. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Later that night, I found myself standing outside Noah's room. The door was slightly open, and I could see him sitting on his bed, his baseball glove in his hands, turning it over and over. I knocked softly. Hey, bud. He looked up. Hey. I hesitated before stepping inside. You okay? He shrugged. I guess. I sat down beside him, staring at the glove. You know, when I was your age, I had one just like that. He perked up slightly. Really? I nodded. Yeah. I used to take it everywhere. Thought if I held on to it tight enough, nothing would change. Noah looked down at his glove. Did it work? I smiled sadly. No. He exhaled through his nose. I don't want things to change. I ruffled his hair gently. I know. Silence settled between us. Then, he turned to me, his expression serious. Are you mad at Mom? The question caught me off guard. I thought about it. About the nights I had spent seething, planning, waiting for the right moment to take everything back from her. I thought about today, the way her voice had cracked, the way she had looked at me, lost and small. Finally, I answered. I was, but not anymore. Noah studied me carefully. Then, slowly, he nodded. And just like that, the anger that had fueled me for months began to fade. I had been so focused on winning that I hadn't stopped to think about what came next. But now, sitting beside my son, I realized this was what mattered. Not revenge. Not the past. Them. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. The days after the custody hearing felt strange. Not in the way I had expected. No rush of victory, no satisfaction in Serena's defeat. Just a quiet, persistent emptiness. The house felt different. The absence of her presence lingered in small ways. Her perfume no longer clung to the air, her heels no longer clicked against the marble floors, her voice no longer filled the quiet spaces. But it wasn't just her absence. It was the weight of my children's sadness, the way Noah barely spoke at dinner, the way Madeline hesitated before asking about her mother, as if afraid of my reaction. I had one, but at what cost? One evening, as I was going through emails in my office, Noah knocked on the door. Can I come in? Of course, I said, setting my laptop aside. He stepped inside, fidgeting slightly. I recognized that nervous energy. It was the same way I used to feel before a big game, before I had to step up and prove something. Dad, he said finally, do you hate Mom? I inhaled slowly, choosing my words carefully. No, I don't. He looked surprised. But she hurt you. She did, I admitted. But she's still your mother. And that matters more than anything between us. Noah nodded slowly, but his face was still clouded with something unspoken. You can love both of us, Noah, I said gently. You don't have to choose. He swallowed hard, nodding again, and I realized just how much he had been carrying. The pressure, the confusion, the fear of disappointing either one of us. I reached out, squeezing his shoulder. You and Madeline are the most important thing in my life. That hasn't changed. His lips pressed together, his gaze dropping. She cried, you know, after court. I stiffened. She tried not to show it, he continued. But I saw. For the first time, I hesitated. The part of me that had wanted Serena to suffer, to feel every ounce of pain she had put me through, flickered briefly. But it was gone just as quickly. I exhaled, nodding. I know, Bud. Noah shifted his weight. I don't want you to feel bad or anything, he said quickly. I just thought you should know. I reached for him, pulling him into a hug. He was getting taller, his frame lean but growing stronger. I held on longer than usual, letting him know, without words, that he was safe. When he finally pulled away, his shoulders were a little looser. Can we watch a movie? He asked, grinning slightly. I chuckled. Go set it up. I'll make the popcorn. And just like that, things felt a little lighter. A week later, I walked into Whitmore and Harrington, the weight of a new reality settling on my shoulders. With Victor gone, the board had been scrambling to stabilize the company. Meetings had stretched late into the night, and the financial damage left in Victor's wake was deeper than any of us had anticipated. Gregory Lancaster met me outside my office, his face serious. The board wants you to take over as CEO, Nathaniel. I blinked. I had expected discussions, maybe even a formal proposal. But not this. Not yet. Effective immediately, he added. I ran a hand through my hair. And if I say no? Gregory sighed. Then we're in serious trouble. The company needs stability. You're the only one they trust to provide it. I exhaled. I need time to think. Gregory nodded. But not too much time. When I stepped into my office, I found myself staring at the city skyline, the familiar landscape stretching endlessly before me. I had spent years chasing power, control, success, and now it was all mine. But for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted it. That night, I sat with Madeline as she colored at the dining table, her tiny fingers clutching a crayon, her brow furrowed in concentration. That's beautiful, I said, leaning over to look. What is it? She grinned. It's us. You, me, and Noah. I smiled, warmth spreading through my chest. I love it. She hesitated, biting her lip. I didn't know if I should put Mommy in it. My breath hitched slightly, but I kept my voice even. You can if you want to. Her eyes flicked up to mine, studying me carefully. Will it make you sad? I swallowed. No, sweetheart. It won't. She nodded slowly, then picked up another crayon and carefully drew Serena beside us. When she finished, she held up the paper. Now it looks right. I studied the picture. Simple, childlike, yet somehow more honest than anything I had felt in months. Yeah, I murmured. It does. A few days later, I met Serena at a cafe. She looked different, tired, but not defeated. There was something softer about her now, something real. Thanks for meeting me, she said, stirring her tea. I nodded, waiting. She took a slow breath. I know I don't deserve kindness from you, but thank you for how you've handled everything. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure how to respond. I don't expect you to forgive me, she continued, but I want to be a better mother. I need to be. For the first time in months, I saw her. Not the woman who betrayed me. Not the adversary in court. Just Serena, the mother of my children. That's all that matters, I said quietly. She exhaled, blinking quickly. I'll try not to disappoint them. I nodded, standing. Good. As I walked away, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore, and that felt like freedom. The days blurred into weeks, and somehow, life kept moving. It wasn't the same. How could it be? But it was something. It was steady, predictable. Some nights I sat alone in the living room, whiskey untouched on the table, staring at the quiet space where Serena used to sit. Other nights, I found myself listening to Noah and Madeline's laughter from the other room, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to hold my breath. Things weren't perfect, but they were real. One evening, I was washing dishes when Noah walked into the kitchen, hands stuffed into the pockets of his hoodie. He hesitated near the door, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I glanced over. "Something on your mind?" He shrugged. "I was just thinking, maybe we could invite Mom over for dinner sometime?" The words hit me harder than I expected. I gripped the edge of the sink, letting the water run over my fingers. Noah's face was careful, like he wasn't sure how I'd react. "Not a big thing," he added quickly. "Just dinner. Just normal." Normal. I swallowed, nodding slowly. I had told myself that this new life was about the kids, about giving them stability, about putting them first. And yet, when faced with the idea of letting Serena back into our space, even for a meal, my gut clenched. It wasn't about anger anymore. It wasn't even about the past. It was about stepping into something unknown. But then I looked at Noah, really looked at him. He wasn't asking for me. He was asking for himself, for his sister, for something that might make things just a little less broken. I took a breath and dried my hands. "Okay," I said. His eyes widened, caught off guard. "Wait, really?" I nodded. "Yeah, we'll figure it out." He grinned, relief flickering across his face. "Cool." As he left the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, exhaling slowly. Maybe this was how healing started, not with some grand gesture, but with small steps that felt impossibly heavy. A week later, Serena walked through our front door for the first time in months. She hesitated in the entryway, as if she wasn't sure if she belonged there anymore. And maybe she didn't. But when Madeline saw her, she lit up like it was Christmas morning. "Mommy!" She ran straight into Serena's arms, and for a moment, the tension in the air melted. Serena closed her eyes, holding her tight. "Hey, sweetheart." Noah hung back near the couch, arms crossed, but I saw the way his lips twitched, like he was trying not to smile. I cleared my throat. "Dinner's ready." We sat around the table like old times, but it wasn't old times. It was different. At first, there was silence, the kind that made my skin itch. But then Madeline started talking, about school, about a dog she wanted, about a picture she drew. And then Noah made a joke. And then Serena laughed, really laughed. And somehow, the night didn't feel like something we had lost. It felt like something we were learning to build again. Not the same, not perfect, but something.